Got a good group today.
Yeah,
I don't see anybody in the waiting room, so
It was the reminder for the Zoom.
If you don't start learning how to use your phone, I'm gonna open up a can of whoop.
probably doesn't want us listening to our conversation.
yes.
Um,
Okay. This meeting is being transcribed and don't show this again, right? Do I care?
yeah,
No, I don't think.
okay.
Don't talk
And
with your
it's
mouth full, it
and
says.
it does say that it's being recorded, so hopefully we'll find.
Okay. Wait. Sorry, I muted you. I'm trying to let somebody in and things bounced around.
Oh, that's okay.
There we go. Well, I see by the old clock on my wrist that it's 4 o'clock. So perhaps we could get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tech Club. I'm Laurel, and there's a good group of us today. Good for you. Aaron Brumley, who's our IT supervisor here, as well as a swell fellow, is going to talk to us today about passwords, as you well know. And I was just saying, I thought I was up to date because I wrote them down. But I think there's more for us to know. So I'm going to hand the meeting over to Aaron and I'm going to mute myself. And that's a good idea when we're in a big group to mute ourselves. So if you aren't mute, please do so right now. And we'll hand it over to you, Aaron. Thanks for being here today, Aaron. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Laurel. I'm happy to be here today. Everybody hear me okay? Great. Welcome. Uh, I wanted to start by asking what people do with their passwords and what your personal experience is like a little bit. So Laurel kicked us off with an example of writing down in a book, which is a great start for keeping track of things. Does anybody else have any personal methods that they'd like to share before we kick off with some recommendations of mine?
Yeah, feel free to unmute if you've got an answer.
Linda?
Yes, I I got some help in installing Keychain,
Hmm.
but I'm not sure I'm really using it in the right way. I get confused sometimes. So, that's what I've tried to do.
Okay, so that's an example of somebody who's already using a password manager. That's good. How many of you are using a password manager already? Anybody?
Hi.
No?
A little
Okay.
bit. Fun.
Well, that's the main thing I wanted to talk about is the possibility that you might want to consider using a password manager. So we'll get to that, and I'm going to start by pulling up my slide deck here. Just a moment.
Here.
There we go. Okay. Uh, this is going to be a pretty conversational uh, program here. I've got some slides to illustrate a few things, but we will mainly be talking about password managers, but passwords in general and security is the subject area. Most systems that you access use passwords, but there are some other security steps or authentication steps that I wanted to point out. But password management is the central thing and the tricky thing. Well, they're all a bit tricky, but you're all used to using passwords. I wonder if you find that you've reused passwords. That's kind of hard to avoid. There's a tendency to want to reuse an existing password because you remember it. And the process of having to remember the password when you're logging into a service is a challenge. So using the same password for multiple services is kind of natural for people, but is not a great idea. And I'd like to start by pointing out what's important about not reusing passwords. It may seem harmless at first, but most of us already heard that that's not a good idea, but it may not be clear why it's not a good idea. You hear about breaches frequently where a company will be hacked and the data that they control will be exposed to the hackers and then potentially shared with third parties. That can happen with stored credential information like usernames and passwords. You may end up, if you are affected by a breach, having your password for one service exposed through a breach of that service. That is limited to a risk associated with that service if that is the only service that you use that password on. But if you've used that password repeatedly with other services, then the sharing of that password on the dark web or the selling of your user credentials, if that takes place, may affect you by someone who gets credentials to one of your accounts being able to use those same credentials with others of your accounts. So if you've used a password with multiple accounts, then a breach of one of those accounts is effectively a breach of all of them. And that's what we're trying to guard against by using tools that help with the process of creating secure passwords and then storing them and making them easily accessible. Oh, somebody's not muted. All right. Oh, hang on. Where'd my shared screen go? Pardon me, do you all still hear me? Okay, good. Just having a little technical hiccup, just a moment. My presentation has frozen up. Sorry. I should have it reopened in just a moment. Oh, now Chrome has crashed entirely. Great. Naturally. Okay. Getting back to it.
Always fun. This makes the rest of us feel really good.
Yeah, it happens to all of us. And it always happens at a time like this.
Yeah, even to the tech guy. See, it
Afraid
happens to
so.
all of us.
My browser is usually pretty solid, but once in a while it fails, and it's usually at an inopportune moment like this. Okay, it's back open. Slideshow started again. And slideshow shared. There we go. Okay. All right. So, as Laurel mentioned, one method of keeping track of your passwords is writing them down in a notebook. Do you all see this? I'm afraid
Yeah.
I've lost you, images of you. So, all right.
Yeah, I see it.
You'll just have to speak up if you have a question. I can't see you or see your raised hands right now. Using a notebook like this is a great first step. Keeping track of your passwords is an important thing. Usually there's some kind of recovery process for passwords if you lose them, like using a link on the sign-in page, which will usually rely on your email as a method of recovering your password. So maintaining access to that email account is very important in that situation. But keeping track of the passwords is one of the core features of any password management solution. Notebook is a good step. But there are better options, technical solutions that will provide a password generator to create a complex and secure password like the one you see on screen here. This is a screenshot of the password manager that I use. It's called Bitwarden. That's one of the plethora of different password management tools out there that you could choose to use. You'll see the password manager built into Bitwarden is generating a complex password that includes lowercase characters, numbers, uppercase characters, special characters, a mix of these characters. And this password manager gives me a lot of flexibility in assigning the characteristics of the password that I want it to have. You will probably find that with most services, there's some kind of minimum length and a minimum level of complexity that usually is in the form of use, lowercase, uppercase, symbol, and number, or some combination of those, and then meet a minimum length of 8 characters or 10 characters, something like that. Sometimes there's also a maximum length, which might trip you up a little bit. But a password manager having a built-in password generator helps you to take that thought process out of creating passwords. And that's one of the main things we're going for with a tool like this, is eliminating that decision-making process of what password should I use. And if you're using a password manager, then you only have to have one password or one authentication that you need to manage outside of the password manager, and that is the authentication for that service itself. So in my case, that would be having access to my Bitwarden master password and then any other required login parts. So in the case of most of these services, that would be a password, usually called a master password for your password manager. And then also a second factor of some sort to ensure that your account is not only secured with a password, because a password you can lose or lose control of. And if you lose control of a password, then some other party could sign into the service. But if you're relying on both a password and another factor, a second factor, such as a code sent to your phone, or a security key, or a code generating app, then that can provide an additional layer of security that allows you to sign into this service safely and ensures that someone who has your password isn't able to sign into the service without that second factor. In addition to letting you generate passwords, a service like this may also offer the ability to generate passphrases, like you see on the screen now. The advantage of a passphrase is that it's easy to say and remember. So one of the biggest benefits of using a password manager is that it's going to fill in these passwords for you in most contexts. But if you are reading the password off of your phone, for example, and then trying to enter it into a computer, it can be helpful for the password to be a passphrase that is easy to just read and then enter. So reading this, cresting 5, quicken divided. Having read it once, it's pretty easy for me to remember that long enough to enter it into a password field somewhere. Before continuing on here, we'll flip back to hopefully be able to see you all. Can I do that? Let's try that. There we go. Which password manager to choose is one of the biggest sticking points and questions. I would recommend starting with the consideration of what devices you use most frequently. Primarily your phone, but consider your phone, your computer, your tablet, if you happen to have one of those. If you are using an Apple phone, computer, or tablet, or all of the above, Apple has a built-in password manager that might be the best choice for you. Or if you are using a Google based system, so that would be Android based phones like Samsung's or Google's delivered phones, the Pixel series, or any of a huge number of other manufacturers' devices. There's a built-in password manager in that context that you might want to start with. So starting with the password manager provided by your device software provider is often a good start. Apple, just a couple of months ago, announced that they, or rather released with iOS 18, a new version of their password manager tool that is a separate app, the Apple Passwords app. That tool is more interoperable between systems than ever before and could be a great solution for you if you're an Apple user. If you use a mix of different solutions, you might want to consider a third-party tool like Bitwarden that I had on screen a moment ago, or something else like that. The advantage to software like Bitwarden or other third-party password managers is that they can be used between different operating systems and between different browsers. That may be less possible if you're relying on Google's provided password manager or Apple's provided password manager. But if you find that you're, primarily on the iPhone, Apple's a great starting point. If you're primarily on Android, Google's is a great starting point. If you find that you're primarily on Windows, that might also be a good reason to think about looking at third-party options. But another aspect of this to consider is what your primary browser is. Chrome is the most popular web browser, of course. So the Google Password Manager is built into Chrome and will by default be the system that it prompts you to use. That Chrome Password Manager is a great tool, but it has some limitations. It is, let me pull up my presentation one more time here. Don't want to get too far ahead of myself. Here's a little information about the Apple Password Manager. If you've been using iOS devices for a while, you will probably be used to it presenting you with recommended passwords. Most of these password managers will do something like that, where they show you, there's a little information about Google's. Here we go. This is Apple's password app, and you'll see it's providing a recommended, a suggested password here at the bottom that you could just accept. You should see that pop up when you're creating or filling passwords in a browser context on Safari or other browsers on the Apple platforms. This is similar to what I was showing you a minute ago with the Bitwarden tool, where it's providing a recommended option, but there's by default a suggestion that's not showing you all of the additional controls that you might have if you dig into the settings. The Apple tool has really improved enormously recently here. There is even an ability to share passwords, which is one of the key features that you might want from a password management solution. Historically, up until the release of this new version of Apple's tool, you were restricted to using the passwords that you create on your device. It could synchronize between devices. So if you had an iPhone and a Mac and iPad, your iCloud keychain would synchronize between those devices, and you'd be able to use the same passwords you created on your iPhone on your iPad or your Mac. That's great and very convenient. But what if you had a family member that you also wanted to share a password with? Well, up until recently, there wasn't any built-in way to do that. And you might be tempted to do something like send a password in an email or in a text message. I would recommend against that generally, because once you've sent something like that, it's then recorded and clear text viewable to anybody who happens to have access to that message, which is, it's not a terrible risk probably to share occasionally with friends and family if you need to send somebody a password, but a better solution would be a controlled sharing environment within a password management platform. And you can do that on the new Apple Password Manager. You can also do that with some of the third-party tools. Here's a little more information about, this is the selection tool that you might use to pick which password manager you want to use on an iOS device. So you have choices in which password manager you prefer. You're not restricted to just using the Apple Password Manager. You could use one of these third-party tools that I'm going to talk about, or you could use the built-in password manager of a browser like Chrome. So that's one of the options you'll see if you look at the autofill and passwords section of the settings on your iPhone. There's something very similar in the Android environment where you can select which provider you choose to use. Oops, sorry.
Karen, can you see the chat box?
I cannot. I'm
Okay,
sorry
there's
when
a
I'm looking at
question.
this.
That's okay. There's just a question popped up maybe a few moments ago. Oh, now I'm getting something else. Isn't WhatsApp encrypted? Is the question.
Yes, so sending via an encrypted messaging protocol would be a good step. Most messaging platforms are encrypted these days. Even most email providers provide a level of encryption. That's true. It is encrypted in most cases, but if you're sending a text message, for example, that is not encrypted. In all cases, it's not encrypted when you're sending a simple SMS, I should say. There's a lot of nuance in these things. So Apple devices communicating with one another on the Apple messaging platform, that should be encrypted, but it's not encrypted necessarily when it passes from an Apple device to an Android device, for example. Now, it's I'm not sure that I'm communicating what's most important about the sharing feature. One of the great things about using a password manager for sharing, suppose that you create a group and you and your son or daughter perhaps are in the group together, and you have several passwords that you share in common. They're in that password group. Suppose that you change the password and your son or daughter is relying on access to that password in the password manager. Well, if your password is changed in the password manager, they immediately have that because they have access to the password via the manager rather than via you manually sending something to them. So if you're relying on the same management system, then either of the people who has access to it can make changes to those passwords, and the other parties who have that common access will be able to see those changes right away.
Say it was never my part of the world. I was working with the, fish plan, but that, but interesting.
I'm not sure whether, is there a question?
Yeah.
I just muted them. I think
That's
it's not
quite
a
all right.
question.
Quite all right.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can get the text box up here so I can follow along. There we go. If you do have other questions, I think I'll be able to see them if you pop them in the text box.
Okay.
All right. There's a huge number of alternative password manager tools out there, and this is a rubric of some of the features that the various providers may or may not have. Sharing passwords is common. Let's see, you'll see that. Yeah, password sharing, line 23 here. A lot of these different platforms have that password sharing capability. I'm not necessarily going to recommend specific providers, but there are quite a few of them out there. 1Password is one that the New York Times Wirecutter tech review site recommends as a preferred option. Bitwarden, as I mentioned, is the one that I personally use. But there
There's oh, excuse me. There's
Sure, go
another comment here in the box.
Thank you. Yeah.
My worry is that the manager can be hacked, can't everything? So how can we avoid that? Is there data about if and how often that has happened?
That has happened with some of these services. So you'll see, sorry, again, if I switch back to my presentation, I keep losing access to the chat bot. So, or window rather. So keep reminding me if you see some of those. I was going to point out LastPass is an example case of one that I'm aware of that was hacked. And that is a risk with some of these platforms. The possibility that your password manager itself might be hacked is something that is a worry for people. I would say that the advantages of using any of these password managers generally outweigh the risk associated with the possibility of it being hacked. Now, it's partly a matter of your personal opinion, whether that is the kind of thing that you accept. But I would emphasize that the password management systems like LastPass and others generally store all of their information in encrypted formats that are difficult for hackers to access. So I can't give you full details on the LastPass hack. I don't have like a rundown of exactly what happened in that incident, but most of these services will store their user credentials in an encrypted format that might expose some information, but not all information. So that's one avenue of potential protection is the services themselves. They understand that what they're selling is a security product, and they try to take the best steps that they can to protect your data. Some of that involves encrypted storage. That's not, definitely not something that would make everyone simply comfortable to think that. That's not enough. I agree. The access to these services, you want to certainly make sure that you're using two-factor authentication to access any of these services. That's one layer of protection you can add. But the possibility of any of these services being hacked is there. Now, there are options if you think that the risk associated with that is great enough that you don't want to trust a service to keep your password material. You can rely on a kind of roll your own solution with an open source tool like KeePass. This tool is one that I relied on for quite a while. It will allow you to keep a locally stored password database. Then it's up to you how to keep that, which reduces the usefulness and effectiveness of these platforms enormously, I'm afraid. It's one of the biggest advantages to using a platform like this is the interoperability between devices. So if you're relying on something that's only accessible on a single system, then it's much less useful than something that is accessible across systems. If it's possible to use the same set of passwords on your phone and on your computer, then that will be a much more useful tool than one that's only accessible on your phone or your computer. So that's one of the disadvantages if you choose to use something like KeePass, or, for that matter, a notebook. But if you are seriously worried about the possibility of the services themselves being hacked, then there are some alternatives there. Let's see here. Just a few others. Dashlane is one. KeePass is the one that is, well, several of them are based on open source software, meaning that the source code to the programs is publicly accessible and reviewable. We won't get too much into that. Keeper is another commercial service. NordPass. And most of these services charge something to use their service. Some of them come bundled with other functions or are part of a set of related features. Like Proton Pass is associated with the Proton mail provider and Proton VPN provider. NordPass also is associated with the Nord VPN service. Okay, back out of that for a moment. The advantages of a system that's based on open source software, I think, are partly that there's a community of people who are able to review the code and lodge objections to any security vulnerabilities that they find, and that can be more publicly shared. So some people consider that an important feature. Let's see here. Let's talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication. So a password is one part of securing an account. Most services these days require or offer at least the alternative to use more than one element to secure the account. So minimum might be supplying a password, but it's not uncommon for a service like Apple ID or Google to require a second factor in order to provide more security for accessing the account. That's particularly important when you're talking about accessing a password management service itself. If you are providing a service that stores passwords, then ensuring that access to that service itself is secure is critically important. So two-factor is always required for these types of platforms. Well, I say always, but it's very normal and typical for it to be required to access these platforms. What is two-factor? What is multi-factor? Well, a password is one factor. What would the second factor be? Well, it's typically either something you have or something that you are. So something that you have might be a code generating app on your phone. You may be familiar with that, where you're prompted to enter a time-sensitive one-time use code. That could be provided either via an app that you link to a particular service, or could be delivered in an SMS or an email. So if it's delivered in an SMS, then that is ensuring to some extent that you have the phone, although there are some risks associated with the SMS transmission. And if it's delivered via an email, then it ensures that you have control of that email address. Or if it's a time-sensitive one-time use code, then it ensures that you have the app on which that code is generated. Usually that means you have that phone. Now, there may be other scenarios where it relies on something that you are. So that would be biometric authentication, like using a fingerprint or a scan of your face. That's become very common with Apple platforms. It's also available on quite a few of the Android devices and Windows computers, other computers as well. So having a scan of your face, that proves that you are something. You are someone to some extent. There may be possibilities for spoofing some of these systems in some cases, but that's part of why you want a multi-factor authentication. So providing several components to prove that you are who you are increases the security of any service you're trying to access. Some of these password management platforms allow you to store even second factor content, which you might think is also some risk, but it also provides some convenience. So the time sensitive codes are one of the things that you can place into a platform like Bitwarden or other password storage tools as well. I would emphasize in thinking about the list of the various options out there, once again, that if you are starting from a point of using an Apple device, consider just starting with their password manager, the Apple Passwords app. And if you're starting from using the Android device, consider just relying on the Google Password Manager. That is often enough, as long as you are taking care to make sure that the account that you access those managers with is secure. So using two-factor authentication and keeping track of your password for those primary accounts. So in the case of the Apple Password Manager, that's your Apple ID. Make sure that you know the email associated with your Apple ID, the password associated with your Apple ID, and you have whatever second factor is necessary. So usually, face lock, but possibly other second factor options. And similar in other platforms, make sure that you keep that master password. It's a good idea in any of these scenarios to keep a paper copy of that master password. So we're again back to that notebook. That is a really important step if you're using a master password for any of these services. Keep a paper copy of the primary account. Let the password manager keep everything else.
Aaron, there's another question came
Sure.
in a little bit ago. What are some of the risks or vulnerabilities when SMS is used in a two-factor identification?
Well, they're a little esoteric, I suppose, but the SMS transmission is not itself encrypted. So someone brought up, I think, WhatsApp before. That is an encrypted messaging platform. SMS is not. And spoofing the source of an SMS message is something that is within the realm of the capabilities of hackers. So ensuring that the second factor is delivered in a safe method is something that is important in securing systems. The details of it, I'm not able to give you too much detail there, except that I know that the transmission is not encrypted, so there's some possibility of interception, and the protocol allows for what's called spoofing, which is pretending to be a legitimate source when you're not a legitimate source.
Here's another question that just came in from our studio audience. If your phone is stolen, how easy is it to get into the Apple Password Manager?
That's a great question. So this is why that multi-factor is so important. If you set up your phone in such a way, well, personally, I'm an Android user, so I'm going to be speaking without a whole lot of direct experience. I help people with their Apple devices, and I know that it's possible in some cases to turn off the codes associated with accessing your device. You don't want to do that. The device unlock features are what protect your password managers as well. Now, I haven't gotten a chance to play around with the new Apple Passwords app, but I'd be very surprised if they allow you to use it at all without ensuring that your device lock features are enabled. That is a typical thing. If you're using if the security of the app is as it should be, then it should require you to have your device lock features enabled and then rely on those device lock features to ensure that access is only allowed to the person who can unlock that device. That should, in most cases with modern Apple devices, be something like Face Unlock. So it's ensuring that you are the right person to grant access to. Now, that's pretty limited description, but that's about the best I can do to explain it. It relies on secure access to that device, and then once that access is granted, it assumes that you have access to the passwords. Let's see. Maybe we should turn to some other questions. Have you all faced problems with your passwords in the past that you think you might be able to benefit from a tool to help solve? Password reuse, of course, is the one that I think of most. That's the biggest thing that this helps to solve. Is if you're using a manager, you don't have to think about creating the new password or subtle variations on a password. That's something that a lot of people do. That is generally not advisable. So if you use the same password for every service, but you change a number at the end, that's not really good enough. I would recommend against that.
If you have a question, go ahead. And I think you can
Please,
unmute
yeah,
yourself
that'd be great.
and ask a question. I don't know. I'm just trying to keep up. But yes, I'll just say I'm famous for using the same thing pretty much over and over again. The dog's name with a number.
I would emphasize you should not feel bad about that. It's so like the challenge with passwords was coming up with a plethora and then keeping track of all these different passwords. That's a real problem. And you need a tool to help solve that problem. The notebook is a really good step, but then you have to find that notebook and fill things in. It's better if it's on the device you're trying to access the service on, and you can rely on that automatic filling of the password to help you out.
Okay, here's
Oh yeah, here we go.
Oh, here they come. Can you see them?
I can see them now. Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Okay, I'll let you answer.
I'm sorry, I keep flipping back and forth between things, and I'm shuffling the questions to the back. So thanks for bearing with me and helping me out here. Let's see. So how does Password Manager work if you are using a public computer? Well, that's a very good question. So if you have a smartphone and you have that with you, then that would be the best method of accessing your passwords while you're using the public computer. Just use the app on your phone. So all these services are interoperable between all the different platforms. So if you're on Apple, for example, I keep going to Apple because that's just the most common phone in our patron user environment. But this is true of all the different apps. You look at the app. Here, but